Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. What impact will demonetization have on economic activity and GDP growth? Has it been implemented thoughtfully or unthinkingly? And how effective can it be in tackling black money and counterfeit currency? Those are three of the issues I shall tackle today with one of India's foremost economists, a member of Niti Aayog, Vivek Debroy. Professor Debroy, let's start with two characterizations made recently of demonetization. Speaking in Parliament yesterday, former Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh called it organized loot and legalized plunder. How do you respond to that?
Well, as a former Prime Minister who's been Prime Minister for 10 years, Dr. Manmohan Singh has far more expertise on organized loot and legalized plunder. So I would not like to comment on what he has said. Let's move on to the substantive issues.
Except that you've made a very telling point when you said he has a lot of experience of loot and plunder.
I have a great deal of respect for him, and I have a great deal of respect for his expertise in those two expressions.
A second characterization, this time from a fellow economist, Jantar, a couple of days earlier, he said, demonetization in a booming economy is like shooting the tires of a speeding car.
To the best of my knowledge, this is the first time Jantar has accepted that it's a booming economy and has compared it to a racing car. So people seem to be changing their views on what has been happening pretty fast as a result of the trigger on the 8th of November. And I think that's a good thing.
But what about the fact that he says it's akin to shooting the tires? You're taking praise from the fact he's called the economy booming. What about the tires?
Let us move away from Jantar and talk about the substantive issues.
In which case, then, let me phrase the question like this. I'll come in a moment's time to the specific impact on GDP growth. But let me begin more generally by talking about the impact on economic activity. Now, as you know, India is a country where 90% of all transactions happen in money, where 85% of people are paid in cash. In those sort of economic circumstances, what will be the impact on economic activity if 86% of all currency is removed in one fell swoop?
Let's take that in bits and pieces. Firstly, one must realize that some of the figures that you are quoting are somewhat old. So therefore, those figures should be taken with a pinch of salt. Not that the issue is unimportant, but those figures are somewhat old. And one must realize that many people who speak on behalf of the poor don't seem to realize that there has been a significant increase in the number of even the relatively poor who have bank accounts. 255 million people now have bank accounts under the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana. So the issue of financial inclusion is no longer what it used to be 3 years ago. Don't get me wrong. Several of these people have RuPay debit cards, but they have not been persuaded, they have not been motivated to realize that those debit cards can be used for transactions and not just for ATM withdrawals.
Getting them to do it is not going to be easy, and it won't happen quickly.
Certainly not. But therefore, one must distinguish between what has been attempted on the 8th of November, which is directed against black wealth, and against cash. Nothing is being said against cash.
But it's the impact that this will have on two specific sectors that many believe are worst affected that I want to explore with you. To begin with, what's called the informal or unorganized sector. Now, this is said to be 45% of GDP. It's said to be 80% of all jobs. And as you know better than me, this is a sector that traditionally is financed by what are called non-banking finance institutions, including money lenders and hundis. But all three of them are either short of, if not starved of cash. So what will be the impact on the informal sector?
All right. I'm glad you mentioned the informal sector, because let me quickly react and say that most of the figures that you see on the share of black in GDP are not actually the share of black, they are actually the share of the informal / unorganized. So when you see figures like 40% of GDP is black, that's simply not correct, that's informal, unorganized. Obviously, India is in a process of transition. India is in a process of transition, and that takes time from informal to formal, from unorganized to organized. All of that is going to take time.
But what's the impact on the informal sector?
I'm coming to that. So we are talking about a period of transition. We are talking about a period of transition which will last till perhaps the 30th of December. It may even spill over into the remaining 2 quarters of this fiscal year.
And the longer it spills over, the bigger the impact, which is why I come back. What's the impact? What's the impact on the informal sector?
We'll come back to the impact, and we shall talk about actual figures instead of generalizations, because we need to talk about actual figures.
So tell me, what is the actual impact as you see it on the informal sector?
Well, firstly, a lot of loose statements are being made about GDP. I'm belaboring the point, but a lot of people are shooting their mouths off on GDP without realizing. I'm not referring to Mr. Thapar. I'm talking about expert economists who do not remember what they should have studied in undergraduate first year
All
national
of that,
income
Professor
accounting.
Debroy, may be true, but it's not an answer to my question.
No, it's not.
So why not come to my question?
I will come to your question. I will come to your question. Now let's take land, real estate, flats. I buy a plot of land from you. That does not affect GDP. GDP is the value of annual goods and services
But
produced.
land is not in the informal sector. Construction workers who work are, so come to the informal sector.
I will come to the point. I will come to the point. But because you mentioned this earlier, let's get this out of the way.
I didn't mention it earlier.
No, you said. You did say, you talked about GDP. You talked about GDP.
I said I will come to the impact specifically on GDP later. I haven't come to it as yet.
No. You were talking about Jandres. Jandres, racing car, is about GDP growth.
Yes, and you answered that. So now let's move on.
Okay, so now let's move on. All right. So
please tell me, I'm just phrasing the question again because I think it's so important. What do you believe is the impact on the informal sector?
All right, so let's talk about numbers. We are talking about 14 lakh crores, roughly speaking, which are being pulled out of circulation. Out of these 14 lakh crores that are being pulled out of circulation, do you want to interrupt me again?
No.
Okay. Out of the 14 lakh crores that are being pulled out of circulation, some amount is being pulled out of circulation and is being put back into circulation. So that remains by and large a constant.
And that's understood, but I'm coming back to my question. What impact will this have on the informal sector?
Beyond this transition point, on this part that is coming in and coming out, no impact.
Okay, I'll tell you why I ask.
Yes.
Because casual wage labor, as Rajiv Kumar writing in the Indian Express today says, could be as much as 60% of India's workforce. Now these are people who earn day by day or at most week by week. When they don't earn, sometimes they don't eat. I'm talking of construction wage labor that could be affected. I'm talking of rural labor that could be affected. And a whole lot of other people. What would be the impact on them of demonetization and their employers not being able to pay them?
So let's talk about the specific numbers, because if we want to answer this question, we need to understand the numbers. So out of the 14 lakh crores, there is some sum that exits and comes back into the system beyond the transition period. That's a constant, no change. We are talking about 1.5 lakh or 2 lakh crores.
On those specific numbers, as of the 22nd of November, 14 lakh had exited, and the RBI said 1.36 lakhs, which is roughly 1/10 of what is exited, has come in.
Yes.
But so it's 1/10 only at the moment.
This is a transition period.
So I'm asking you then, what is the impact on casual laborers who depend on day-to-day income to survive? If manual labor on construction sites, manual laborers on farms now find their employers can't pay them and they're not employed.
Are we talking about the transition period, or are we talking about beyond the transition period?
We're talking about
Which
the transition period.
First, let's talk about the beyond the transition period.
Talk about the transition, then we'll go beyond.
Now, obviously, in the transition period, everyone is suffering an inconvenience. Now, if you are looking at the inconvenience, a large part of it was related to ATMs. Now, so far as the banks...
Well, no, forgive me. I don't think casual wage labor actually gets money from ATMs.
Who does casual labor get?
They get money in cash from their employers.
You may be very surprised. Very few people. Show me the numbers.
Okay, let me quote a figure to you put out by Sitaram Yechuri on television yesterday. He got it from the Export Promotion Council. He says the EPC has said that 4 lakh jobs in just 3 sectors, garments, leather and jewelry, have been lost. He also says that the EPC says that this sector employs a total of 31.9 million people who are paid either daily or weekly. They come under the casual labor category. Their jobs are theoretically at stake and at risk.
Do not use the word theoretically. What happened on the 8th of November is part of a broader jigsaw. There are several other measures that have happened. In the Indian economy, in certain sectors, is going through a slowdown. If these figures are going to be taken seriously, you have to demonstrate to me, not as Mr. Thapar, as Mr. Yechuri, who has studied economics at some point, has to prove to me that these job losses are because of 8th of November alone and not because of other things.
But what you're giving the impression to the audience, and clearly you're giving that impression to me, is that you don't believe there is a sizable or important adverse impact on casual daily wage labor and on the informal sector. You don't give...
Beyond the transition period.
But you're not even telling me during the transition period what it will be.
During the transition period, these are things that are impossible to quantify.
Okay.
But once the transition period is over, for let us say the 7 lakhs or 8 lakhs that is used for transactions out of the 14 lakh crores, beyond the transition period, net, there will be no impact.
So to sum up,
to
sum up, what you're saying to me is that as far as casual wage labor and more importantly as far as the unorganized sector is concerned as a whole, there will be some small impact during the transition period.
That's correct.
But it will be more than made up afterwards. And even during the transition period, you're giving the clear impression that the impact is not going to be one that is particularly worrying, not one that is particularly serious.
Yes.
That's the clear impression you're giving.
That's correct. But that's on the 8 lakh crores. There is another substantive amount that's still left out of the 14 lakh crores.
Let's then come to a second sector that many believe could be adversely affected by demonetization. I'm talking of agriculture. This is, as you know, the Rabi sowing season. It's a critical period for farmers. Yet at the moment, many farmers simply don't have the cash to pay the agricultural labor they need, but they need that labor at a particular time. If they don't get it, the crop could be lost. And secondly, even though the government has given them permission to use the old 500 rupee note to buy seeds, you know this better than me that most farmers don't buy seeds from government outlets, but the 500 is only permitted for government outlets. They buy it from the private sector, and you can't use the old note for the private sector. So my question is a simple one. This being the case, what do you, Bibek Debroy, believe will be the impact, A, on the Rabi crop, and B, on agricultural growth this year?
Again, the moment you use growth, it is a very specific question pertaining to GDP, which we went off.
I talked about agricultural growth, but begin with the Rabi crop as a whole, and then come to agricultural growth.
But let us look at a slightly different question.
But no, don't answer this, and then we'll go to the other question. Otherwise, this will get deflected.
No, this is related. This is related because you mentioned the agricultural crop. There is going to be a shock. The question to answer is, which slot do you have in the entire calendar year which is appropriate for that shock? I challenge you to establish before me that short of the summer months, will you be able to find a single month where there is either not an ag season or there hang on, let me finish, I have not finished.
I'm only interrupting you for one reason, that I accept the point you're making, that no matter when you do demonetization, there will be a shock.
Except the summer season. And can you imagine?
So what you're saying is that the fact that there will be a shock to agriculture is something that would happen no matter when you do it. I accept that. But the question I'm asking is, in the present circumstances, how do you estimate the shock?
Beyond the transition period, there would be net no shock on account of this. But we still have not addressed the issue of the remaining part of that 14 lakh crores, which I do want to answer at some point.
But once again, like you said when we were talking about casual daily wage labor and the unorganized sector, you're saying also with regard to agriculture, net
beyond the transition period
there will be no long lasting adverse impact.
Correct.
But you're also suggesting, and I'm clarifying this, you're also suggesting that the shock during the transition period is not such a big worrying shock.
It is not something that is very easy to quantify. There is a shock. It's not something very easy to quantify, but whenever this happened, there would have been that shock.
Now, Ashok Lavasa, the finance secretary, told the Economic Times today, and I'm quoting him, our biggest concern is that the current sowing season is not adversely impacted. He clearly believes or fears that there could be an adverse and a serious adverse impact. He wants to ensure it doesn't happen. You don't share that concern.
I am saying beyond the transition period, there will be net no serious shock. Obviously, during this period, there will be some shock. I said that earlier also, it will register itself.
But you also said it won't be a huge and worrying shock.
It won't be a huge shock in terms of percentage slowdown in GDP growth.
An economist called Sumitra Chaudhary, writing in fact, I believe the Economic Times, said on the 15th of this month, and I'm quoting him, demonetization will exact a sizable and inescapable cost on the economy. I just want to repeat those words. A, sizable, B, inescapable. I take it from everything you're saying, you disagree with him.
I disagree on the use of those expressions, and I would like Soumitra, who is skilled in statistics and econometrics, to establish for me in quantified terms what is this impact.
In other words, you're saying he simply asserted it, he hasn't established it in quantified terms.
That's absolutely correct.
Let's then come to some attempt to try and work out in quantitative terms the hit on the GDP as a result of demonetization. In an interview that you gave the Business Standard on the 20th, you suggested, and mark my words, you suggested that it could be just about 0.1% of GDP, and as you said, that too would be a conjecture.
But
let me finish.
Okay.
Let me finish. Yesterday in Parliament, Dr. Manmohan Singh said, he didn't suggest, he said it would be a 2% loss to GDP, and he added that was an underestimate. And if I've got my maths right, he's 20 times greater than you. How can you convince the audience that you're right and Dr. Manmohan Singh is wrong?
Firstly, the question on the Business Standard. I hope you read not just the answer but the question. The question pertained to only Q4 of this fiscal year, not the entire, just Q4. And I also said it is very, very difficult to quantify and estimate.
Are you suggesting that beyond Q4, it may be greater than 0.1%?
No, I'm not suggesting that, but the impact could not only be negative, could be for positive, also positive, because of that missing 6 lakh crores that you're not allowing me to answer.
Absolutely. So what you're saying is that there is an impact as small as 0.1% in Q4, which I presume is another term for what you call the transition period.
Yes, yes.
After that, in fact, it could be positive,
yes,
which means the overall impact for the year may not be a diminishment of GDP growth, it could be an addition to GDP growth, according to you.
If not for this fiscal year, certainly for next fiscal year.
Well, now come then in that case to the second half of that question. How do you respond to Dr. Manmohan Singh, who says that the hit on GDP growth for the year will be 2%, and he says that's an underestimate? And by the way, many agencies may not go as far as 2%, although Montek Singh Ahluwalia 2 days ago did. They put it at 0.5 to 1, but Ambit puts it at a GDP growth for the year as a whole reduced to just 3.5, which is greater than Dr. Manmohan Singh.
I hope you've read the Ambit report. If you have read the Ambit report, it would amount to their overall figure for the entire year would amount to 0% GDP growth in Q3 and Q4.
0.5.
0.5% and 0% is more or less the same.
There's a 0.5% difference.
A 0.5%.
You'd be very grateful to have that in your favor, so don't dismiss it here, but let's leave that aside.
No.
Come to
But
Dr.
on Ambit, I hope you've also read the devastating critique of the Ambit study that's been written by Vivek Dahiya. So if you read one study, do read the rebuttal also.
But come to Dr. Manmohan Singh. He's a former Prime Minister, a former Finance Minister, a former Governor of the RBI, and he said the hit on GDP will be 2%, and he added that's an understatement.
He did not explain to us how he got that figure. I am waiting to see what his exact estimate as opposed to the underestimate is and where he has derived this figure from.
So you're suggesting to me you don't believe him as of now?
I do not believe him as of now, absolutely.
All right. Let's then come to the second issue I want to raise with you, which is the question, has demonetization been implemented thoughtfully or unthinkingly? Now, I'll begin again by quoting Dr. Manmohan Singh. In Parliament yesterday, he said it was, and I'm quoting him, a monumental mismanagement failure. How do you respond to that?
Well, you want to keep provoking me to respond to what Dr. Manmohan Singh
I know
said.
I'm giving you, as someone who represents the government, a chance to answer.
Yes,
I'm not provoking you, a chance to rebut.
But I would much prefer to address the issue instead of Dr. Manmohan Singh's responses in Parliament yesterday. I've already indicated I do not attach too much of credence to what he said in Parliament, whether it is on the 2% GDP reduction or something else. So let's come to the main issue.
Let's then come to 3 or 4 specific areas where many people believe the government was not sufficiently prepared or didn't take sufficient necessary advanced steps. The first, when you're removing in one fell swoop 86% of all existing currency, many people believe that the government should have A, printed, and B, had ready for immediate distribution a much greater quantity of the new 500 and the new 2000 rupee notes. And added to this, they say, the government should also have in advance brought into circulation a much greater quantity of the 100 rupee note. Neither of the two were done. Would you accept that this is bad preparation?
What makes you think that the first one was not done? Let me assure you, there is no shortage of currency notes. Wait a minute.
Well, can I answer that?
Yeah.
Because the answer to that is simple. It's quite clear that the new 500 and the new 2000 were not being printed before the 4th of September, proof of which is they carry Urajit Patel's signature, and he only became governor of the RBI on the 4th of September. Secondly, Soumitra Chaudhary has gone on record in the Economic Times to say that government printing presses working flat out, that's 24/7, cannot produce more than 300 crore pieces of currency per month. Yet on the 8th of November, the government eliminated over 2,300 crore pieces. Now that means, and I'm coming to the end, that means that on the 8th of November, when demonetization was announced, the government only had in readiness 26% of what it was replacing. That is surely proof of poor preparedness.
No, it's not. Preparedness means you have to have the requisite number of currency notes printed.
But they didn't. They had only 600 crore.
Wait, for God's sake.
At best.
For God's sake, let me finish the statement. Soumitra does not work for the Reserve Bank. Let me finish the statement. A, you need to have currency notes printed. B, you need to deliver the printed currency notes to banks. C, you need to deliver the currency notes to recalibrated ATMs. These are different steps in the process.
But I'll come to ATMs in a moment's time.
Now, so far,
were enough notes printed and delivered to banks in time or not? That's the question.
You are mixing up two questions. Were enough currency notes printed? Were they delivered to banks? Well, these are two separate questions.
Let me then break them up to make it easier for you. First of all, enough currency notes weren't printed. By Soumitra Chaudhary's calculations, only 600 out of the 2,300 plus were ready. Only 600.
I'm not going to get provoked into Soumitra Chaudhary's calculations. By around the 15th of January. I'm sorry, by the 15th of November. I think this figure has been quoted by the Finance Minister also, Finance Ministry. 8 lakh crores of currency notes were printed.
Well, hang on a second. If that is the case, why then are there restrictions on how much you can withdraw from your savings account and current account, how much you can take of your own money for your weddings? And by the way, the Economic Times today has reported that yesterday, that's just 24 hours ago, yesterday, banks in Delhi and Bombay got just 25 crores, whereas their daily requirement in Delhi is 130 crore and in Bombay it's 150. So they got something like 1/6 or 1/5 of what they need. Surely, no matter what spin the government puts on it, this is proof there is a currency shortage.
Now we are separating the elements. You began with the printing of currency. Now we are talking about the delivery.
But the two actually are connected.
The two are connected.
Because you don't print enough, you don't have enough to give.
No, the two are connected, but you began by focusing on the printing of the currency.
Because you haven't printed enough. So if you don't print enough, you can't distribute enough.
I just explained to you that there was enough printed by the 15th and there is enough currency now.
You didn't explain. You asserted, as you said, Soumitra Chaudhary earlier was asserting. You asserted 8 lakh crore had been ready. You've given me no proof of it. The government has given no proof of it. And surely, disproof of it exists from the fact that you can't cash as much as you want.
No. So far as that figure is concerned, the overall figure is concerned, that overall figure was cited by someone from the government, I don't remember. What is not cited for deliberate reasons is the composition of the printing.
Can I quote to you the RBI? 22nd of November, Times of India. It says 14 lakh crore was withdrawn, 1.3 lakh crore has been added in by value. That will give you an idea in terms of volume how fewer notes there are compared to what there were earlier, which is why you cannot cash what you want. Let me give you an example. The government says that you can withdraw up to 24,000 per week from a savings account. Loads of people have gone to banks. I won't name the banks, I don't want to embarrass them, but there are at least 5 or 6. The banks are openly saying, we can't give you more than 10, even though you're allowed up to 24. And even the 24 limit, by the way, is illegal, because I should be allowed to take what I want. That is proof you haven't got enough money, currency,
but
coins.
if you're giving that many kind of anecdotal evidence...
It's not anecdotal, everyone has it as proof, but they go to the banks.
But you can also see, just look at the reportage in the newspapers. You also represent the media. All the stories of shortages in banks, not ATMs. ATMs, about half of the ATMs, there is still an issue. All the stories about shortages in banks have generally disappeared.
Hang on a second, they've only disappeared because the government has suddenly stopped the exchange of notes so people aren't queuing up. Otherwise, they would be queuing up. And secondly, when you go to banks, and this time I'll name the bank HDFC, instead of cashing a check, right, they give you a token to say, tomorrow you'll be first in the queue. Why? Because we ain't got the money to give you today. And what was the check? 10,000. That is proof to everyone there isn't enough currency. That's why there's restrictions.
There is, the evidence you're citing is of a point of delivery of currency, but you began by focusing on the printing
But I'm saying the two are connected. If you don't print enough, you can't distribute.
The two may be connected, but also do realize that the moment you begin to bring more people into the chain, you begin to talk about delivery, you begin to talk about recalibrating of ATMs, the moment you begin to do it, then it becomes exceedingly difficult to maintain the secrecy.
Well, just a moment, that again, in it for 4 or 6. So that doesn't apply. And when it comes to ATMs, because I think that's very important, that's a second area where people say the government was woefully badly prepared. Surely, they should have ensured that the new 2,000 rupee note and the new 500 rupee note were the same size, the same weight and the thickness of the 500 and the 1,000 they were removing. If they'd done that, there would be no problem recalibrating ATMs, and the 3 weeks of suffering we've been through, and maybe another 2 weeks more that lie ahead, would have been avoided.
Are you aware, as a responsible representative of the media, that on the 2nd of November, the RBI had started an exercise of recalibrating the ATMs?
And are you also aware that as of yesterday, that is to say the 24th, only 1.2 lakh out of 2.2 lakhs have been recalibrated? That's 50% only. And the pain continues.
Wait. You did not answer my question. Are you aware that there was this attempt on the 2nd of November?
No. But what way does it prove?
Are you aware?
But my question is a different one. My question is that if they had made the notes the same size, the same weight, and the same thickness, there'd have been no need to recalibrate.
Wait. A, there was this on the 2nd of November. B, that story had leaked out in a newspaper I shall not name, a vernacular newspaper.
Several newspapers, actually not just one. It leaked out in Jainik Dagran, it leaked out in a Gujarati newspaper, several Bengali newspapers, and the opposition, I don't want to go into that, but the opposition are using those leaks as proof that in fact people had been tipped off at all. But leave that aside.
No, why should I leave that aside?
I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Because my essential question is not about when recalibration started. My essential question is that if the notes had been issued in the same size, weight and thickness as the old ones, there'd have been no need for recalibration. And let me finish.
Why do you think the notes are in different sizes?
They are.
Why?
Wrongly so, because in America, I'll tell you, the government claims for security reasons. In America, every dollar note from the 1 to the 100 is the same size. If they don't have security concerns, why does India?
It is not a security issue. Are you aware that the 10 rupee note is different in size from the 20 rupee note, from the 50 rupee note?
Why do you think that happens? But they don't need to be.
Why do you?
But they don't need to be.
For whom?
For ordinary, sensible, practical purposes.
You must realize that there are ordinary, sensible people who also happen to be disabled. For them, the way to distinguish between currency notes is often in terms of size.
Oh,
so do realize.
You're talking about at best the visually impaired. That's all. And are you really saying?
So are you discounting them?
No, but you don't design currency for the visually impaired.
Are you discounting
their
importance?
No, I'm not discounting them.
So therefore, let's accept that currency notes have to be different in size.
Oh, forgive me, only if you're designing them with the visually impaired in mind. Otherwise, and that is what, 2, 3, 4% of our population.
And therefore, the 2, 3, 4% of the population can be ignored and discounted.
If that is your defense for the fact that you could have,
I have given you one reason.
If that is the best reason you can think of to answer my question about the size of notes requiring recalibration, and if you change the size of notes, you could have avoided that pain, then let the audience decide. I won't even further interfere. Let the audience decide how credible that reason is. I want to come to one last lapse, as it's called by people, before I take a break. And that is to do with the fact that many people say there was no need to demonetize the 500 rupee note. It's used by rediwalas, chaiwalas, students, housewives, and a whole range of artisans. It's not a high denomination note for people. Secondly, it constituted on its own 48% of currency. What was the need to demonetize that?
Okay, now to give you an answer to this, you have to allow me to explain patiently the misuse that might have happened without interrupting. And I will give you an artificial example. Listen patiently to it. I have got 1 lakh in black. Okay. This happens on the 8th of November. On the 9th of November, I declare 10,000 of this. Legally, pay the penalty. I go to the bank, perfectly legal, deposit this, withdraw 10,000. Perfectly legal. Tomorrow I go back to the bank, say I did not need the money I took out yesterday, I am depositing that 10,000, but instead of depositing the new 10,000, I deposit the old 10,000. I continue
Quite right,
this cycle.
and you go on and on, but how does demonetizing 500 affect this?
Let me explain now. The only way this can be prevented is if the new currency notes are different from the old currency notes. So therefore, you needed to get out the 100 rupee notes and the 500 rupee notes so that someone could not come back.
So this answer, and I'll add my own adjective, complicated for some to follow, is your explanation for why the 500 rupee note had to be demonetized, despite the fact it's not considered high denomination, despite the fact it's 48% of currency, and despite the fact everyone from housewives to village vendors and vegetable vendors use it. That's your explanation.
Because you needed to differentiate.
Okay.
Now, let me add one other thing.
Quickly.
Okay, so we can take it up after the break.
No, finish this because I'll come to another subject.
Now, if you have a bunch of 100 rupee notes, some of the complaint is about a 2000 rupee note. As you are aware, the Reserve Bank of India no longer staples and bundles notes, so you do not have bundles. You as Mr. Thapar go to a bank, and when you take out some money, you will now begin to count because they are not stapled. Counting 100 rupee notes takes much more time than counting 2000 rupee notes. Ditto for ATMs.
So what's this got to do with the 500 not being demonetized?
Not the 500.
Okay.
I'm going back to the question you earlier asked about 100 rupee notes. Why not flood it with 100 rupee notes instead of 2000? I'm responding to that question.
What's the answer quickly?
I just told you that imagine if you, two different scenarios, you go to a bank, if the bank is giving...
In other words, the counting problem for the teller would have increased hugely. Right?
And the time and the queue.
Except that if you'd increased the 100 rupee note supply, when you were going to demonetize 500 and 2000, you'd have made it easier for people to have some currency. That was forgotten.
No.
The teller counting with his fingers became more important than the Aam Aadmi.
No, the teller becoming more important also means you stand there and count and you become more important. And the person, who's in the queue.
Let's say it was all done with my best interest in mind, my meaning the Indian person's best interest in mind.
No, there is always a trade-off, and what you are not recognizing is when a decision is taken, it's taken with a full view of the trade-off. The ATM can stock X number of notes. If it is full of 100 rupee notes, that means that the ATM gets exhausted faster, and you who are privileged to be the first person at the ATM will be able to take out the currency, but the subsequent person will not have the notes.
That again is a full answer. Let the audience judge whether they find it acceptable or whether they find it somewhat difficult to accept. Demonetization. Professor Debroy, let's come to what many would consider the raison d'etre of the whole exercise. First of all, demonetization is intended to extinguish black money. Pranab Sen, the former chief statistician, says that only 6% of black wealth is held in cash. Rajiv Kumar, writing in the Indian Express today, says it's 10%. Mr. Chidambaram said perhaps 15. Whether it's 6, 10 or 15, even if it's 100% successful in eliminating it, is the pain we're going through worth that limited gain?
Again, let's take that in bits. Firstly, there is the creation of black income. This is not meant to address the creation of new black income.
In fact, nothing has been done to address the generation, so leave that aside. We'll come to that later on if we have time.
No, who said that?
Well, very
For
little.
God's sake, read the Finance Ministry press release on the 8th of November listing out the various initiatives. I expected you to do your research better, listing out the initiatives on the creation of new black income. So do not have a blanket statement saying nothing has been done.
I am quoting Dr. Montek Singh Aluwalia writing in the Mint today. He's listed 6 or 7 critical steps that need to be taken if the black money is to be stopped. Everyone agrees that steps that are needed and necessary to stop generation of black money have not been taken. The Prime Minister has promised them. He's begun by talking about Benami property, but those are yet to happen. I'm talking, let me finish, let's not get deflected. I'm talking about the extent to which demonetization will be effective and successful in ending the black money that exists in cash.
All right.
Not the black money in gold, bullion, real estate or jewelry, in cash.
I am objecting to your statement saying nothing has been done.
All
Please
right.
do not say
Let's
that.
come to this.
Do not say nothing has been done.
How effective will this be in tackling the 6, 10 or 15% of black money that's held in cash?
So far as the black wealth is held in cash, yes, black wealth is held in other forms as well. I said at the beginning that this is only one particular instrument. It's not the only one. Are you saying, or are people who are voicing your opinion saying that because this is only 10% or 15%, nothing should be done about it?
I'm not saying that at all. I am of the personal opinion that even if all you succeed in tackling is 6, 10 or 15, it's worth doing. The question I asked is the pain the country is being put through justified by such limited gain? It's a different question. Answer that.
It's not a limited gain, because again we are going around using the word black in two completely different senses. One is when the activity is black, in the sense being illegal. The second is when the activity is not illegal, but you have not paid taxes. Now, in either case,
which you called single black and double black.
That's correct. That's
which is
correct.
Tantalizingly similar to what Scotch whisky calls itself, but leave that aside.
Well, I will not get into Scotch whisky, but so far
it might be needed at the end of this, but let's get on with it.
All right, but so far as tax money that comes into government coffers is concerned, that can actually be used for expenditure on public goods and services.
So you're saying even if you only eliminate 6%, 10 or 15, it's worth doing, and the pain that we're going through is worth it?
Because it is a transfer, relative transfer from the relatively rich to the relatively poor.
Okay. The second explanation that is given for demonetization is that it effectively tackles what is called counterfeit currency. Speaking on Saturday in Goa, the defense minister said thousands of crore, that was his exact phrase, thousands of crore of counterfeit fake currency would be eliminated. Yesterday, in an affidavit to the Supreme Court, the government said, and it was quoting the National Investigative Agency figure of a survey done just last year, that only 400 crore of counterfeit currency circulates in the economy at any one given point of time. And secondly, this only grows by a fairly paltry 70 crore a year. My question once again is simple. Given the pain of demonetization, which could continue for a while, is a 400 rupee targeting of counterfeit currency really worth it?
By the way, the estimates on fake counterfeit currency have shot up. As per the RBI's own figures.
But I'm quoting the affidavit given by the government in the Supreme Court yesterday.
No, you misunderstood what I said. That even that figure reflects an increase. And my response would be the same.
That figure doesn't. That figure is quoting the NIA, and the NIA was based on a 2015 survey. So it's the 2015 figure the government is quoting in the Supreme Court.
You still haven't understood what I've said. Compared to 11, 12, the estimates have shot up. That's all I'm saying. I would still say that whatever be the figure, it is worth taking that action. Do realize that this is a continuous process. You use technology as government, the criminal uses technology. So this is a continuous process. This is never a one-shot answer.
Can I sum up this by putting it like this? And I think it's an accurate paraphrase of what you're saying. Whether the elimination of black money is 6, 10 or 15%, it's worth it. The pain is worth it because eliminating that amount is worth doing. And secondly, you're saying, even if the counterfeit currency you're tackling is just 400 crore, which by the way is 0.028% of the currency in circulation, even that is worth doing. the pain is worth it once again?
Because apart from anything else, it may be difficult to quantify. In both cases, they are also deterrents to future generation of either variety.
One last question. When will the sort of steps that people believe are necessary to tackle the generation of black money really be taken? I'm not talking about the black money that exists, i.e. the stock. I'm talking about the incentives that lead people to want to create more and more. When will those be taken?
Your question is based on your adjective of nothing. I will repeat. There was a list of what has already been done, including the income declaration scheme. The income declaration scheme had preceded.
But that wasn't going to stop the generation of future black money. That is simply trying to bring into the market money that is hidden from the tax.
No, but there were several other measures that were linked to it, like the clamping down on cash transactions. There is GST, which brings in a whole lot of people into the tax network.
Let me give you an idea of the sort of things Monte Carlo Valle, writing in the Mint today, believes are necessary if you're going to effectively tackle generation of black money. One, reduce discretion in land and land use and increase transparency. Secondly, drastically lower stamp duty for real estate sales. Thirdly, lower tax rates and simplify the tax system. A major effort at cleaning up political funding, perhaps even state funding if necessary, and certainly a requirement that all donations to parties, whether below or above 20,000, must be made public. And finally, he says, or he doesn't actually, but this was an idea that many have, remove the tax exempt status of agriculture so it can't be used as a conduit for laundering black money.
I am sure, I agree with all of those, and I'm sure Montek knows perfectly well that the Prime Minister in various speeches has mentioned several of these, including setting the discourse for electoral
as things
reform.
he wants to do. I'm saying, when will they happen?
Now, some of these can only happen because they are related to reform initiatives that Montek is very well aware of, and so are you. Namely, the stamp duty part is linked to the GST process. The agricultural income part, not agricultural income, but initially, this is a state subject, but initially the non-agricultural income of agriculturists, that's also on the agenda.
But by the way, agriculture, I believe, I could be wrong and I stand to be corrected, was in fact a taxable item in Maharashtra right up to the 80s.
It is a state subject.
I know.
That's all I'm saying.
But governments therefore can tackle it. Politicians can.
Oh,
they
yes,
need to do it.
Sure,
because
absolutely.
until they don't, or rather until they do, incentives to create black money will continue.
So what one must realize, the bottom line, and this is really the bottom line for me, what this has done is to focus attention on this as a major issue. Whatever figure you believe or you do not believe, large number of people are in support of this, and it places all of this, not just 8th of November, squarely on the agenda.
So
That's the single
you're
most
saying
important
this was a
contribution.
good and necessary first step.
Yes, absolutely.
But it is just a first step. More is needed.
Well, there were some people who did not believe that this first step would be taken. So let them at least recognize that the first step has been taken.
Dr. Debroy, a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.